Hi everyone. Um, so this one wasn't really planned, but I had a bit of an exchange with someone earlier on a thread, and it made me think this would actually be a good subject to talk about. Um, I must admit it worked me up a little bit, perhaps more than it should have, but some brainless idiot tried to smear me as a racist, right? Now, if you're a white guy, um, there are two particular smears that are inflammatory. Well, if you're a guy in general, the misogyny one is obviously loaded. If you're a white guy, then racism, a white person, it's a very, very heated charge, and it couldn't be further from my DNA, my way of thinking, and my way of looking at the world. Now, people might say, oh, well, you shouldn't be bothered over one individual, but the problem is with the nature of social media, this sort of thing can be exacerbated. And I noticed a number of people had liked his comment. I rather robustly challenged him to back it up. The context of this, I should say, was a rapper. I can't remember her name. I don't really care. But she has apparently made some song about the Roe versus Wade decision being overturned. It's obviously a huge issue in the States right now. Excuse me, just a little bit of an agitation there. Yeah, so she's made this song and it's quite I thought the lyrics were a bit vulgar and fell flat because people aren't going to focus on the message, they're going to focus by the fact it was like a lot of rap nowadays, it's just in your face and very crude. And I said that. I said that I'm broadly pro-choice, but it's going to fall flat because of that reason. So this guy, white guy I might add, said, well, there are racial overtones to your comment. And I must admit, it worked me up because this is the sort of manipulative, cynical dishonesty the woke leftists like to use. Um, so I've challenged him, whether he, actually comes back or not, to back that up, to point out anywhere where I said anything racially charged. I think the logic is, well, often rappers are black and it's enjoyed by young African Americans. Therefore, if you criticize it, there must be some sort of racist thing going on. Well, here's the thing: I don't like death metal either, or black metal, and it's predominantly white artists. But a race baiter won't say, "Well, you must be anti-white because you don't like that." Um, I absolutely loathe race baiting. I think it is cynical, dystopian, dishonest. I think it's actually evil in terms of the effect it has on society. Thomas Sowell, the American conservative philosopher who's black, um, famously said, racism isn't dead, but it's kept on life support. And I believe the full quote is by politicians, by others who want to keep it alive. And I think there is some truth in that. Where I might disagree with Sowell is this idea that it's completely there's no issues. I think there are some issues in America. Um, I think there is some inconsistency in the justice system there. So I wouldn't quite agree with conservatives that it's all overblown. I think there are issues. But my question would be, how do we differentiate between race baiting versus being honest around issues to do with race? So, for example, we had yet another scandal in this country concerning the grooming of vulnerable young girls by British Pakistani men in Telford. We've heard this before in Rotherham and Rochdale and Oldham, and it's now widely understood that the reason police and authorities did not act was the fear of being seen as racist. This is a very serious problem because we're not talking about one or two cases, we're talking about an industrial scale problem. These so-called men have a racist attitude. They see these girls as cheap and easy. But I remember when this was first sort of being reported in the mid 2010s, people on the left were saying, oh, but you can't say that because, predators are not a race. Well, My response was always, yeah, sure, you get predators from all racial backgrounds. You get white predators as well. In fact, one of our most notorious, of course, Jimmy Savile, was white. But I believe that if there is a specific problem, it has to be addressed honestly. And what we saw in those cases was a specific problem of British Pakistani men deliberately targeting vulnerable, young, predominantly white girls. It's just a reality. Where the racial tensions grow is not from confronting the problem, but failing to confront it. That's where the problems arise. So you have, on one hand, there will be white people furious that this isn't being addressed. And by the way, it flies in the face of this notion of white privilege. There's absolutely nothing privileged about these. I was going to say young women, girls, nothing privileged at all. Um, I lost my trail of thought there, but yeah. So you have white people who will be angry about the lack of justice, but you'll also have British Asian people who will get angry and think, oh, but this is a racist generalization. It's saying that all British Asian men are the same, except nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying that. Prominent British Asian men like Majid Nawaz, Sajid Javid, have spoken out on this to their credit. They've said this is a problem, we have to tackle it, and we have to make these evil men face justice. But there is still too much of a defensive attitude and too much of, well, it's not happening. I mean, put it this way, as a white guy, I do not deny that there are white racists. I do not deny that there is a particularly nasty, loutish culture in this country. It can be very xenophobic and racist. I've personally seen it. I've seen drunk louts shouting out racial abuse at minority people. I've seen that. So I don't deny it. Um, but I think we really have to just be honest without race baiting. Now, some might say that's a contradiction. Well, let me give some examples. If we're talking about a particular problem, let's say in London, for example, or Birmingham, there is a particular problem with young black men killing each other. Now, if you look at other regions, if you look at the northeast of England and Scotland, the chances are it's going to be young white men involved in gangs. Both are problems. They need to be specifically addressed. Um, why is it happening? Why is it that so many young black men in London are involved with this? What is going on? I know for a long time now the Metropolitan Police have had an entire department looking at this, probably mixed success. But what I love about race baiting is it brings about the concept of racism where it doesn't exist. As an example, if you have two blokes arguing, and one happened to be black and one happened to be white, or one's Asian and one's white, or one's Asian and one's black, you name it. Now, it might well be that these two guys just don't like each other. They've worked with each other, they're colleagues, they just don't get on. Maybe one guy thinks the other guy's a liar. Maybe the other guy thinks he is a double crosser. Maybe they were friends. Maybe they fell out over a woman. Maybe they fell out over something else, over money or whatever. It could be some generic problem. But a race baiter sees that. Well, it must be racism. And more likely it will be aimed at the white person. It must be racism. Sadly, I think this is what's happening in the States. In America, it's such an inflammatory issue. I mean, in the past, you had this Jim Crow problem where you would have all a black guy had to do was look at a white woman and he could be killed on the spot. There was some horrible, horrible things went on. I mean, you'd have to be pretty cold not to see those lynching photos from the early 20th century and not feel utterly sickened by them. I know recently there's been calls for the woman who falsely accused Emmett Till of sexual assault to be arrested. Apparently, there is a outstanding arrest warrant that was found in the Mississippi courthouse. So it's still the ghosts of that era are still around. But the problem is, I would argue, it's also went the other way now, whereby a white person who's accused of racism, their profession will be absolutely over. They will be absolutely vilified on social media. They will be destroyed. Now, what the hell happened to due process? And what I find deeply troubling is people just jump on the bandwagon. You even have the situation in the States of, like, if there's been some sort of confrontation, then you'll get a left wing mob getting outside the person's house. I think that's very ugly, and it's brainless. Because what about due process? What about hearing both sides of the story? Um, it's more than brainless. It's actually quite scary because when people are not thinking objectively, anything can happen. Um, and I really think the woke left have a lot to answer for. In 2020, when all the BLM protests were going on, riots, let's call it what it is, riots, shamelessly, there were senior Democrats encouraging that. CNN, I would argue, if not encouraging it, they certainly weren't condemning it. But there were senior Democratic lawmakers basically encouraging it, literally saying, go out in the streets, be angry. Now, Joe Biden and others did, after a while, say, if you're looting, you should be arrested, and we don't condone criminality. But, one of the biggest problems I think with American discourse is both sides will not introspect. So there are Trump supporters who they will not acknowledge the extremes in their midst. They will not acknowledge that on January the 6th, there were a bunch of um, crazy people who basically thought it was okay to riot, to aggressively invade the Capitol like that, and it was not peaceful. Absolutely was not peaceful. People who had a contempt for democracy, they could not accept that their candidate lost, so they done what they done. But the Democrats have really, really been pushing that one. They failed to acknowledge that they were encouraging the urban arrest over George Floyd. Both sides are wrong. I mean, American moderates, for goodness sake, speak up, reclaim the ground, moderate conservatives, moderate liberals. You need to rein in on the extremes because this isn't just about America, it's coming over here as well. I mean, so much of the vernacular, this hijacking of the English language, thug, for example, the word thug, it comes from thuggy, which was purportedly a movement in India in the 19th century of bandits. But the word, what it literally means, is an aggressive person, right? So someone who assaults a stranger for no reason is a thug. That's been racialized now. So if someone who happens to be black assaults a stranger, and in Britain this isn't quite as sensitive, but in the States, oh, if you call them a thug, that's racialized. Just like that example I gave of me criticizing the rapper. Oh well, there must be a racial overtone. The way the left do this is despicable. Another example is microaggressions. So you're at a party and you're making conversation with someone and it's friendly. So I would say like, "Ah, do you like the music? Um, by the way, where are you from?" Right? It's just a social, amicable question. But no, that's a microaggression. Of course, it would depend on the context of which it is said. Now, if I go up to a minority person and say, where are you from? That's hostile, right? So it's body language, it's tone. But this is what is so despicable about race beards. They just always ignore the context, always. Because asking that question, well, you must be saying they're an outsider. No, it might just be from another city. It really pisses me off because I think it causes a lot of problems. I think it creates suspicion. I think it's just toxic. So what I'm arguing here is that where there are problems, they need to be addressed. But I honestly think Western society in general has come a very long way. I mean, this idea that America is a deeply racist country, America elected a black president twice with very comfortable um, poll numbers, It's, of course, there's going to be racists in America because you can never totally get rid of racism. You're not going to have a situation where there's 330 million people and there aren't some of those people with a racist attitude in any country. But I am sick of Western society being denigrated and smeared and vilified as racist, as fundamentally racist. And you get them doing it about this country as well. It's this constant demand to self-flagellate about the British Empire, about race. It's just I would argue, honestly, we're one of the most tolerant countries in the world. I would say most Western European countries are. I would say most liberal democracies are. But what they do is they cherry pick examples of intolerance and say that's the whole picture. Oh well, it must be societal racism, systemic racism. Just the level of dishonesty and distortion and inflammatory narratives, it's just despicable. And I am not at all being blasé and saying there are no problems. That is not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. But let's take the famous example, George Floyd. Now, what happened there? Was that an example of racism or was it an example of police brutality? I would say it was the latter. It was an example of a police officer abusing his power. But look at that incident. There was no racial terms used. Chauvin wasn't using racial terms against Floyd. He killed Floyd, and it's right that he went to prison. I think one issue that came about with all those protests was the question of police power. Now, I happen to think there are some American cops who are out of control. They think that wearing a uniform makes them immune from justice. And it is right that that is challenged. It is right that that has changed. And that's an area I would disagree with conservatives on because I think there is a problem. But there was a guy called Tony Timpa, white guy, pretty much the same circumstance. That he died at police hand. That gets a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the attention that George Floyd got. Why? So I'm not proposing any quick fix to this. I just wish people could be more honest and more objective. And I just think it's reprehensible that it's so easy to just smear people as racist without really backing it up, without an onus to back it up. I mean, it's like accusing someone of being a homophobe or a transphobe or a misogynist or an Islamophobe. Those are also loaded terms. But I would say even none of those are as loaded as this. You know, I think there should be a lot more of an onus on people to back up their claims. It's not to say that it doesn't happen. It's not to say, I mean, if someone feels they've been a victim of racist bullying, they should be heard, sympathized with, or at least they should be heard. But I feel it is just too damn easy to vilify people with those sort of terms. And I would like to see a bit more of an onus on those throwing such terms around. The woke left, they're reprehensible the way they do this. Why not just say we have a problem with police brutality and we need to address this? But the same people, who were angrily protesting about the death of George Floyd, they won't have a damn thing to say about Bloods and Crips, gang members making life a misery for citizens in America's big cities. They won't have a damn thing to say about the fact young black men are killing each other in Memphis or Detroit or St. Louis. Um, I just really want to see American moderates speak up more and get more. And they probably are, but they need support. But it's coming over to the UK now. A lot of this vernacular. Um, we're seeing terms that the definitions are just being distorted to mean something more sinister. Another one is Oriental. Now, the word Oriental simply means of the East, from the East. That's all the word means. But now, according to the wokes, it's archaic and bigoted. Well, we have the word Occidental, of the West. I accept that language changes and evolves over time, but and certainly there's words that were used in the past that should be in the past. But what I think's happening is this crusade, this sort of purification, this decolonization of language. It's just unrelenting. It's just unrelenting, whereby someone could absolutely mean something in the most innocent and honorable way, or most innocent and harmless way, but they're attacked. It depresses me and it pisses me off. And I really, really think there needs to be a fight back against this. I will say this. One thing I like about the current Conservative Party is you do have people, minority people, incidentally, people like Kimmy Badenoch, Joella Braverman. um, and others, ethnic minority MPs, who are speaking out against this nonsense. And I think that is very refreshing. I think it's important. The left accuse him of engaging in the culture wars. That is so pathetic because it's the left that are, demanding language be changed. It's the left who think there's no problem with using terms like white privilege whilst claiming to be all about compassion. It's the left who say, oh, we need to speak out against bullying, yet bully anyone who thinks differently from them. I should say the woke left, like on the trans issue. Oh, we're all about compassion and we need to believe in compassion. But any woman who dares to say biology matters, she must be a turf. Let's attack her. The hypocrisy is pathetic. And yeah, you could probably tell by the tone of my voice I'm quite worked up by this stuff. I just think I just think it causes unnecessary division and problems in society. I'm going to wrap this up because I've some shopping to do. But if you're in the UK, take lots of water. We're in a heat wave, so yeah, take lots of water. Let me know your thoughts, people.